All right, so again, today we're going to explore the way in which we all imagine the environment. What is mediating that perception? So I really want to focus in on really what is considered an aesthetic quality. Aesthetics deals with precisely that, the way in which we interpret various messaging, images, and the way that that produces our imagination of the environment, what we envision it to be. Again, last week we had looked at the connection between material and social ordering, looking at the work of Anne Berg and her connecting the Third Reich's material ordering with their idolatrous social ordering. And so the take-home message of all of that is that we have to think of those things together, right? This is not disconnected. And so how we arrange our environments pertains to both a material as well as a social reality. It's an intentional and a creative process. To discard is to create a certain kind of order. And the question is, what is that order? And I want to begin again today with how we got here. If we think through the waste crisis as it exists today, there's always been the problem of waste. But in terms of the sheer volume, this harkens back to disposable living and disposable lifestyles, the increasing use of one-time use items, right? So think of your styrofoam plates, plastic containers, and walk into any grocery store and just look around, and you can't escape the fact that everything, right, is packaged, even those things, as we discussed, that don't necessarily need to be packaged, like bananas that have their own packaging, right? What's behind that effort to seal everything and kind of give bananas their hermetically sealed environment and keep them nice and pristine, right? That involves a certain kind of understanding of order. And part of the problem, I think, with a lot of the statistics we see is we don't know what to do with them, right? The sheer volume, not just of waste that we see in the landfill, but even these numbers, right, that go into the billions and trillions, and they end up getting so large that we can't even envision them. We don't even know what to do with that. And those numbers, just it's easier to ignore them than to try to figure out what they all mean. And this is where Chris Jordan, we'll look at two of his projects today. The first one is called Running the Numbers. And he, through photography, is attempting to help us perceive and understand and maybe even relate better to these numbers that we're bombarded with. And so here's how he does that, right? You start with this mess of plastic bottles. And he continues to zoom out. And eventually they kind of lose focus. We start to can't recognize them as such, to the point where within this frame is 2 million plastic bottles, right? Within this, the frame you're looking at. And that's the number of plastic bottles used in the United States every 15 minutes. So those numbers, 2 million plastic bottles every 15 minutes, if we translate that to a month and then to a year, the number becomes so large that it's incomprehensible. So this is Chris Jordan's attempt to say, hey, this involves an actual place, right? There is no such thing as a way, and these things go somewhere. And it's nice to think that they all end up back on the supermarket shelves as renewed plastic bottles, but in reality, that's just not the case. And most of them end up being discarded. So that's Chris Jordan's way to help us kind of crunch those numbers and think through what we might do with them. And so I just want to see what is your initial, when you hear numbers like that, or when you see those statistics, what do you do with those? Or what's your reaction immediately to those images and statistics relating to the amount of trash, or even if you think of something else that you hear about that is this number that's just too large to comprehend?
Greg, I think for me, it's a little, I think we talked about this last week. It's similar to my vote. My vote, what's one vote, right? One vote is like one of those little bottles, not even. So I may as well not bother voting because it won't make a difference. Well, obviously that is wrong. At the same way here, right? Every time someone drinks from a plastic bottle or buys a 24-pack of plastic bottles, they say, that's you can't even see that on this picture, so it won't actually have an impact. Clearly it does. If everyone thinks that way, this is what you end up with. So you have to think in terms of ones your one and its impact on this multiplied by all those people.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
My first reaction is just horror, dismay, disgust. What can we do?
I guess I would say, why is it? Why? Isn't there must be some way out there to manage the production of plastic? Have we had a major cultural shift? What will it take to change expectations?
And what will it take to change us in using the materials that we have, making really strategic decisions about, I'm just not gonna buy that kind of stuff, or wherever that goes. But it's a humongous problem, and I look at that and I'm so distressed. Just, the earth can't handle that.
It's just part of the plastic problem.
Right.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And we're going to continue to think through this. Just wanted to just hear your initial thoughts and reactions. And hopefully after the context we provide going forward, we can explore this question maybe in a bit of a different light. So what I want to think through now is the way in which green images, and by that we mean a lot of the images that are co-opted within environmental narratives, the way that that's shaping and guiding our perception, and how that then is producing a particular kind of engagement with those material resources. So to what you've just alluded to, right? What's forget who had stated this, but how did we get here, and what's the way out? Is it indeed hopeless, right? Is there anything we can do? How do we begin to change our behavior in such a way that we pay more attention to this stuff? So again, I showed this picture last week, and just think this is really interesting, right? When you look at even the color of the sticker, right? It's green, it's organic. And that alone can somehow, or a lot of times makes us think that what we're doing is somehow helpful or good because it has this stamp on it that communicates a message to us that, well, this is okay, right? And it should be strange that these bananas are sitting in their own little boat and wrapped in plastic, and they're only 109, right? For those 4 bananas. What enables that to be true? And so I want to take a rather complex philosopher, but just focus on one particular point he makes that I think is really crucial for our discussion. And this is the French philosopher Guy Debord. And he will help us to understand and recognize the way in which our perception of the environment is mediated by certain images. And so for Debord, the visual field dominates our view of reality and mediates what we understand about the world. And this is increasingly true. He's writing in 1967, this particular work. And I think we could say it's even more true today with social media, the fact that we are being bombarded constantly with a variety of images and not really paying much attention to most of them. And yet, as we are continually bombarded, it begins to shape our perception and what we understand about things like the material world. So he calls this the spectacle, right? The spectacle is referred to as a social relation between people that's mediated by images. And this is the connection I want to make to our conversation last week about material and social ordering. If indeed we buy into this argument and we see images as mediating our relationships, our social relationships, I think this is really crucial to recognize environmental messaging, the images that we associate with environmental messaging, and whether or not the realities they propagate are true realities, or whether in some ways it's preventing us from thinking deeply enough about these problems to actually produce some real change. And so he describes the sole message of the spectacle as what appears is good and what is good appears. So we accept these images, we adopt them, we co-opt them, and then they become our reality. And the only way to reinforce that that reality is by the continual use of images. So we think something's true because of the images, and then new images that are related continually reinforce that idea and continue to make it true in our minds, right? We say it louder, we say it longer, and pretty soon people start to believe it. So I want to focus on two particular images from that are really common in the environmental movement. One that you will all know very well, the recycling logo. The other, which some of you have familiarity with, some of you may not, depending on your age. And this is the Crying Indian advertisement. For those of you who were alive when this aired, many I've spoken with have said this is an advertisement that stuck with me. It's something that when I saw it for the first time, it really shaped my understanding of waste and changed some of my own behaviors. And I started to feel bad for littering and started to want to clean up the environment more. But want to look at this in terms of how it began to shape our understanding of environmental responsibility and the way in which this message was produced and the idea behind it. And this message comes during the beginning of the environment revolution, the Earth Day, right? 1970. You have people that are starting to think through waste practices and seeing waste pile up and seeing waste littering the environment and saying this is a problem and we need to think about a proper solution. But going back to that throwaway living, companies wanted to, this is the best thing that could happen. The fact that people can use these products, dispose of them, and then purchase again. So that bottom line, right, they did not want that to be hindered. So this was an intentional effort of the Keep America Beautiful ad council campaign that was heavily influenced by a lot of these industries, the container industries that are making these single-use disposables. And what they did, and this is a particular evaluation from Finis Dunway, a historian who assesses these images, and he says this produced a kind of hyper-individualized environmental citizenship. And I'll show you the advertisement in a moment, but it ends with the line that really stuck with people. People start pollution, people can stop it, right? So there's that hyper-individualization of this large public concern. And furthermore, by situating private feelings within public spaces, industries, the ones producing these single-use disposables, granted themselves an aura of value neutrality, right? It's not really up to us, we produce it, it's up to the people who are consuming to properly dispose of these items and be responsible and not simply throw them at the feet of the crying Indian. So there's the famous tear that's shed by Iron Eyes Cody on behalf of that polluted landscape. And again, thinking through the notion of spectacle, Debord tells us that images are mediating our perception of reality, and that's true in this case of our understanding of the environment. And as we assign waste to the specialists within the waste industries, we just continue to pass on responsibility. And really this is what's happening, is companies are outsourcing that responsibility to the individuals, and then individuals are hoping that through their properly sorted refuse, that this will become the responsibility of somebody else to make it into something new. None of us wants to litter, right? None of us wants to pollute the land on which we live. So we create this vision that, well, it's all going to be okay in the end. We can continue living as we are, and it'll all be okay. And Ginger Strand, I think, helpfully summarizes that pseudo-reality, this false reality that the ad is propagating. This is how she puts it. It was an elegantly closed circle. The titans of packaging pushed throwaways into production. The ad council preached the creed of consumption, assuring Americans that the road to prosperity was paved with trash. The people bought, the people threw away. Then the same industries and advertisers turned around and called them pigs. The people shamefacedly cleaned up the trash, and the packagers, pointing to the cleaned up landscape, just went on making more of it. So no change in behavior, just a shift in responsibility from the manufacturer to the consumer. And the second image, the one that you can't escape, it's on everything, is the recycling logo, this Mobius strip the arrows chasing one another. And this has a similar individualizing message. But what I want to argue is that the Crying Indian advertisement offers a false protology, a false origins account. The fact that we, just by cleaning up the landscape, can return to Eden, we can have that pre-Edenic paradise and this pristine landscape, a perfect environment, whatever that looks like. And then when taken alongside the recycling logo offers the eschatological hope. This is the end of all things. So we have here both the beginning and the ending, and the story that's being told by the Crying Indian advertisement and the recycling logo. So this logo indeed promises, the closed loop says that products will remain in use forever. As long as we properly sort them, if you put the right objects in the right bin, as soon as they leave your front lawn, after you make your weekly offering to the trash companies, they will take care of that for you, and it will become something brand new. And of course, that requires a certain market for those goods. Many of those products, as we'll discuss next week, end up at landfills very close to us and incineration facilities. And so this still, though, makes us believe that there's hope, right? These materials can be used forever. So it gives us this hope that our increasingly disposable lifestyle need not be considered wasteful, right? We can continue to dispose, but we're not really wasting anything. So we get this social and ecological well-being alongside a notion of limitless production and consumption. So I want to put you into breakout rooms for a moment now, and having dissected those two images, ask you who you see as responsible, who bears the responsibility for decreasing the volume of material waste, and why? Why is it the responsibility of this group or the combination of groups that you think bear that responsibility? So is it the consumers, manufacturers, corporations, or is it all of the above? Is it some intersection of all three of those? So we'll take about 4 to 5 minutes to let you discuss this in smaller groups. I'll put you into breakout rooms in a moment, and then we will just take a moment to see what was discussed in those rooms. Okay, so one more instance. I'm going to try to move a little more quickly here, skip past a couple sections just so we can get to the last question. But Chris Jordan, going back to his work, another one of his projects, Midway Island, he spent some time on this island that's, I think it's about 2,500 miles off the Pacific coast, right? So this tiny little speck away from any human habitation. There has been nobody has inhabited this island for a long time. And what's interesting is he was finding that the habits of our consumption and these disposable products via ocean circulation were ending up on Midway Island and ending up in particular in the stomachs of baby birds who were being fed by the adults who were going out to the ocean, confusing the plastic pieces in the ocean for food, and then it would literally block the digestive system of these birds, and he would find all these birds and then take pictures of them to document this, what was happening. So just so interesting that over 2,000 miles away from any human habitation, and our habits of consumption are still influencing that island. So another example of a way. And he says, for me, kneeling over their carcasses is like looking into a macabre mirror. These birds reflect back an appallingly emblematic results of the collective trance of our consumerism and runaway industrial growth. Like the albatross, we first world humans find ourselves lacking the ability to discern anymore what is nourishing from what is toxic to our lives and our spirits. Choked to death on our waste, the mythical albatross calls upon us to recognize that our greatest challenge lies not out there, but in here. And then one other example, I shared this in a previous class, the Mobro 4000. This was quite a spectacle insofar as nobody wanted this barge of trash. This is the journey it went on, 3,168 tons of trash, initially headed for North Carolina, and ended up making a 6,000-mile trek across 5 states, 3 countries, only to end up back in New York, where it was then incinerated and disposed of in a landfill. And if we think about this in light of creation, thinking through the limits of creation, the givenness of creation, and some of those aspects of ordering that we had hinted at last week through the narrative of Genesis, what Michael Sandel says, and he's talking not about waste, but about genetic engineering. Nevertheless, I think this still applies, where we have a society, and we as a society are emotionally, materially, and imaginatively built on mastery and control. So an interesting question becomes, what does it look like to live within the limits that God has placed us within? How do we live and respect those planetary limits? And what does it mean to live rightly within the earth? And we have portrayals of this, Bradley Cooper. We imagine what would it be like if we could take a pill and unlock our full potential and reach beyond our limits. And I think in this movie, Bradley Cooper ends up using it to go from making very little money to a lot of money, right? So the ultimate success story. The supermarket promises abundance, a lack of limits, right? Every time we walk into a supermarket, we are given this sense that food, household items are abundant. Maybe COVID has caused us to reconsider some of that as it relates to toilet paper and other items that we thought may disappear. But nevertheless, a few months later, the shelves are again stocked, and we know of no food limits, no seasons. There is nothing but abundance. And on one level, right, thank God for that. We live in a land of plenty, and it's something to be grateful for. But it is also something that I think calls us to responsibility in a particular way. I think it causes us to analyze, is this in fact the reality for everybody, right? And how do we make that a reality? And how do we equitably distribute those resources? And this idea of efficiency and mastery even starts to seep into church life and the sacraments. We have a more efficient celebration of the Lord's Supper. And so you can, on Amazon, buy your fellowship cup and wafer in a nice, convenient, easy package that's 100% Concord grape juice. And what I found really comical was some of the reviews. The convenience of these communion cups, as well as the grape juice, it tasted like Welch's, which I believe is the best grape juice. Convenient, but a little difficult to open for some people, and the wafer is like a weird disc of puff air or something. It works though. And then it's quick and clean. I appreciate the speed with which I receive them. And so we see again, like, is this sacrament designed to be participated in the most efficient way possible? And I just find that fascinating that even within the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, we have this kind of de-sacramental quality to it, where I'm not saying the Lord is any less present in that celebration, but it still calls into question our behaviors and what's drawing us to want these efficient and clean and quick cups. Saint Irenaeus gives us a more, writing very early in Christian history, I think provides an interesting approach that connects the material and the spiritual, right? The sacramental reality where the world points to something beyond. He says, a grain of wheat falls to the earth and decomposes, and is then raised with manifold increase by the Spirit of God, who contains all things. By wisdom, it is then used by human beings, receives the word of God, and becomes the Eucharist, which is the body and blood of Christ. In the same way, our bodies, being nourished by it, will be deposited in the earth and decomposes there, and then rise at their appointed time, as the word of God grants them resurrection to the glory of God. So there is this, within the Christian tradition, a very interesting sacramental way of understanding that connection of material and spiritual reality. And I'm just going to gloss over this quickly, and I encourage you to go back and read these passages, but thought it's interesting to analyze this societal bent toward mastery and control in light of the Sabbath rest. We read in Genesis 2 that God on the seventh day rests, and that's not a physical cessation. That is an actual entering into the created order, becoming part of that created order. In Leviticus, we're told that the land God commands the people to give the land a rest. And this is a crucial aspect of the Leviticus command. And so a couple of questions that we don't have time to get into right now, but that I think are interesting to analyze in light of our perception of limits is, why in fact does God rest? And what do we make of that command in Leviticus? And is it still relevant to our post-industrial society? Do we still need to allow the land to rest, and what might that look like? And so I want to end with a final question now, and this is derived from the book by Don DeLillo, Underworld, and I think provides an interesting passage for us to consider as we think through the products we use and what our first thought is when we view those things on the supermarket shelves. And this follows the story of a waste management expert, a waste management official. And this is what he says: Marion and I saw products as garbage, even when they sat gleaming on store shelves, yet unbought. We didn't say, what kind of casserole will that make? We said, what kind of garbage will that make? Safe, clean, neat, easily disposed of? Can the package be recycled and come back as a tawny envelope that is difficult to lick closed? First, we saw the garbage. Then we saw the product as food or light bulbs or dandruff shampoo. How does it measure up as waste, we asked. We asked whether it was responsible to eat a certain item if the package the item comes in will live 1,000,000 years.
Mhm.
So the question then is, how does that idea of seeing the garbage before the product impact your view of consumer goods? Does it at all? And how might it change habits of consumption? What if we, instead of seeing it as product first, saw it as the garbage that it would become? Would that change anything? If so, what might it change? So curious to think through that with you now. What do you make of that question? And I'll put the question in the chat bar here just so we can all see it.
No, I think it's important to do that. I think it does, forget who said it earlier, but it does reorient your consumption from personal to environmental, I guess. I mean, so that it's not, you're not focusing as much on the convenience of getting the water. You're focusing on the impact of you drinking that water from that water bottle. I mean, it's just an example. We're picking on water bottles, but it's in lots of ways. I think it's important. I think if more people did that, it comes back to education. I think we wouldn't have as big a problem.
I think of things like making my own laundry detergent and recycling in other ways that I was actually taught to recycle, because that's where I came from, and my orientation growing up. In Maine, they passed the first bottle bill in the country, I think, back in the 60s. So there was a more of an awareness of that. But every time, and something like using, where are we with plastic bags? I haven't used a plastic bag in I don't know how long. I have a back seat full of reusable bags. I'm not putting myself up on a pedestal at all, but it has been a matter of learning and developing habit and thinking about these things. So yes, I think looking at something on the shelf and thinking about, where's that going to go? I think that's definitely where we need to be.
Get the paper bag. I need the extra recycling.
Just personally, I'll say that I was watching that has had a huge impact on me. But as I was watching it, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of doing laundry and I have this big economical jug of laundry detergent, but it's plastic. I mean, that's what happened to my brain, thinking, oh, I use plastic with that too. So this is educational. This is what we all need to see. And the next question, Marie, I'll have to talk to you personally, is how do you make your own laundry detergent? Really.
Not hard.
But this was an eye opener. I've never thought about recycling in terms of the big heavy plastic laundry detergent.
And that one use single item, that's the biggie right now. And I'd listened to a couple of podcasts, and perhaps Diane or others who are more knowledgeable would know, but there are some companies that are actually trying to redo that packaging process and thinking about those things, and that gives me a little bit of hope, but I'm not sure how large they are and how far they'll reach. But I think, we all must think about it, in my opinion. As you mentioned, Greg, when we make that decision to purchase something, where is that going to go?
Yeah, I think looking at that in the broader view, this class has really made me think a lot about that, and to question a lot of things. But also I am concerned that because of technology, which I have been a very small part of creating as my job, that we have given us the ability to live a very fast life. Everything is being done fast. Children don't go out and play after school anymore. They're rushed to all these different activities. We live a very fast life, and because we live a fast life, in order to live that fast life, we have to consume a lot more than we used to. So we consume more products than the same people living on the planet did 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago. And I don't know how we'll get a handle on that.
I will say, I have read just within the last week, and I don't know how long it'll take, but they're working on some plants that can be used, grown, and make a container out of that will decompose quite quickly. But that's in the future,
Biodegradable.
Yeah, biodegradable. But how far out it is, I don't know. And the other thing, you look at Amazon today, it wasn't even around 10 years ago, all the cardboard, which I know is not the same as plastic, but it takes a lot of trees to make all that cardboard, I don't know what the volume percentage is different today than it was 10 years ago.
At least that's sustainable, because they have to plant more trees than they're going to use just to get the product they make it. So at least it's pulling the CO2 back out of the air.
But it is amazing when you think about it.
I have a question. I don't know, Greg, if you know this. How many states have banned plastic bags? Do you know the percentage of states?
I don't know percentage. I know it's amazing how controversial it is. And there's been some bans that have been, like I think in Texas, they got a ban approved and then they quickly backed away from that. I don't know of which states do have a ban, if any. I think if there was one, it would probably be Oregon, but that's just me.
I think there are
California.
California, yeah.
Delaware just passed that kind of a law, but apparently some of the bigger stores have found a way to kind of circumvent it.
Mm-hmm.
They're passing out plastic bags that are supposedly reusable.
Mm-hmm. And I know in Kenya they did this, right? That's where that landfill was, and they said, and I know people who have lived there. They said it's amazing how quickly it, it's such a key problem. And plastic bags are not, as we'll discuss next week, this is part of the contamination issue with recycling. A lot of people end up recycling and have all the recyclables in a plastic bag, and that can't be recycled. The bags, the reason is the bags, they mess with the sorting machinery. They actually get stuck. And so Waste Management, which handles most of the recyclables in the Northeast, that's an issue they have, where they literally have these waste engineers that have to go and pull all the, scale the equipment and tear all the bags out. So, and that's something, as a transition to next week, it may seem like what we've been talking about is more global and like, what do we do with it? The plan for next week, well, we're going to focus on issues of environmental racism in our own backyard. It's to focus on our local environment, right? Where does our waste go? What happens to the majority of it? What does that look like? So when we think about those fellowship cups after communion, right? What's happening to that? Where does it go? Where does it end up? So we'll be discussing environmental racism, but trying to make it more local. And there are some interesting laws being considered in New Jersey about incineration facilities as it relates to environmental racism. So there's some interesting things in the works, but we'll try to address that head on. So I hope that these first two classes have provided some interesting context and just ways to think through what's guiding and orienting our perception. I in no way want this to produce a kind of hopelessness. You know, I think part of the goal is to confront those rival views of beginnings and endings. And you know, as we remain faithful to Christ, I think the pathway, well, it's not always going to be perfectly clear. As we're faithful, you know, I think that's the beginning of that change, right? Is recognizing our part in all of this. And it is 12:02, but are there any final thoughts, questions before we sign off?
I have one question. I wonder if any of these issues are presented to young people. Are these, so they did away with civics classes in high school. Wonder if there's any, are they teaching environmental science to young people? I'm not going to be around too much longer, but somebody's got to take care of this.
Yeah, I suspect young people could teach us a lot. That's my suspicion.
I suppose so, but I
thought
would
this.
find out that they don't teach civics in high school anymore.
No,
And
they don't.
may be apparent from some of the things that are happening nowadays, and this may be another example. So at any rate,
I'm surprised how much I see young people not seem to care about it.
yeah.
My grandchildren's age, you know, they're kids in high school, and doesn't seem to faze them at all.
Really?
Yes,
I have
it's
a different-
stunningly disappointing.
I have a different experience, so I guess
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, at the airport the other day, just as we were getting ready, people are throwing their water bottles out. There's a trash can and a recycling can right next to each other. And I'm, you know, watching people put it in the trash. I mean, I don't know what it takes.
Yeah, there's two issues, and I thought the same thing, John. Not giving up on our generation, but you know, the youngsters are going to inherit the earth. So
Right.
I agree. I mean, I haven't seen it. I'd love to know if Lori knows. I don't think Evan has gotten specific education. Certainly the social studies and science, you know, there's definitely an environmental friendliness, but it's not like they took a tour of a recycling plant. I don't think he could tell me the right way to recycle, or that you can't put your recycling in a plastic bag. He knows that because we know that.
Right.
But I don't know, Lori, is there like
I can't
curriculum?
speak to the specific curriculum, certainly in high school, but I will put in a plug for CB South. We do have an environmental club. So they do things, you know, they have different collections, and also try to do some education within the high school. But again, I can't really speak to the curriculums, but I can certainly ask and get back to you.
That would just be interesting. And I think to Diane's point, there's two things you need to achieve. One is certainly the how-to, but the motivation is different. Why would you want to, right? And I mean, if the kids watched a movie like you just showed us, Greg, I got to believe that would have an impact. How many kids are seeing that? Not enough. Way too few, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Agree. I taught a confirmation class years ago, and asked them about the environmental impact. And those kids, at least at DPC, came up with recycle, reuse. They went through a whole list. I gave them just a short, brief amount of time, and they were able to at least speak the language. So I guess maybe I was more hopeful that young people are coming along and understanding it more than maybe, Diane, I'm giving them too much credit.
No, I think it is happening. It's just, I think it's coming through the parents.
Yeah.
In my opinion, right? So, I mean, I guess when it gets back to, I think it needs to be more broad based, so that the kids can teach their parents that happens in school sometimes, and I think that's important. Evan's confirmation project actually involves cleaning up a park in our neighborhood, and so he'll continue that tradition, Susan.
Yeah.
but
Well,
he's just one, you know.
Yeah, and one simple project to have, you know, if you're involved with any curriculum that we have our students do here is just to carry their garbage with them for a week. Just 1 week's worth of don't discard anything, carry it all with you, keep it. And it helps to get rid of that notion, oh, this just disappears, right? Like all of a sudden I have to maintain it. And it really is eye-opening. You don't have to even teach anything. You just say, here's your project, right? Keep it all. Or even to open up some trash bins and say, and do a dissection, right? Like what's in here? What could be elsewhere? And what are we throwing out and why? Even just thinking of like a university cafeteria that's buffet style, and the amount of food waste is incredible. And I think young people also are just bombarded with so much, right? That this is just one of many things, and they do care, right? I do see that a genuine. It's not as controversial to talk about these issues, but still, like us, it's that what do we do with this? You know, what do we make of it all? But next week we'll answer all those questions. Don't worry. And so it was good to be with you all. My kids are with a babysitter, so I need to run. Sorry to sign off, but they're running around outside. I realized too that speaking of disposable, I didn't bring any diapers for Timothy, so I really need to run and check. Full disclosure, everybody. But great to be with you all. And next week we'll get to the heart of environmental racism and discuss how that exists in our own backyard. And hope you can join us. But
thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks.